Nobody believed the readings at first. Prillik stood before the temperature display, his long, thin fingers pressed against the screen as if touching it would change the numbers. The Voluni coordinator had spent 40 years managing research stations across 12 worlds. He had seen equipment failures, supply shortages, and personnel conflicts. But he had never seen winter arrive 3 weeks early with temperatures dropping faster than any model had predicted. "The heating system cannot handle this," said Tezson. The Draconid engineer's voice came out slow and heavy. His scales had already begun to lose their shine. "We designed for mild cooling. Not for this." Research Station Horizon had been operational for 2 standard years. It sat in a valley on Ardith 7, a world the Galactic Survey had classified as temperate. The surveys had been wrong. The surveys had been very wrong. David Reyes watched from the back of the meeting room as panic spread through the gathered colonists. The human agricultural specialist had been quiet during most station meetings. His job was dirt and seeds and growing cycles. He was not a leader. He was not an engineer. He was just a farmer from Montana who had somehow ended up on an alien world. But David noticed things that others did not. That he noticed how the Voluni were moving slower each day. Their species came from a warm world where the coldest night was still comfortable. He noticed how the Kolari were huddling together, their small furred bodies seeking warmth from each other. He noticed how Tesson's breathing had become labored, how the proud Draconid engineer was struggling just to stay awake. "The supply ships cannot reach us for 4 months," Prilix announced. His translator gave his voice a calm that his trembling body contradicted. "Orbital Missionix. There is no faster route." A young Kolari named Bryn raised her hand. "What about the emergency heating reserves?" "Already activated. They will last perhaps 6 weeks at this rate of consumption." 6 weeks. Winter on Ardith 7 was supposed to last 5 months. David slipped out of the meeting room. He walked to the station's eastern windows and looked out at the landscape. The ground was already white with frost. The local plants, tall grass-like things with purple stems, had all gone brown and collapsed. In the distance, he could see the ridge where he had collected soil samples last month. Clay. There was clay in that ridge. Good clay. Dense and heavy and full of minerals that a memory came to him. His grandmother's house in the mountains. The wood-fired oven she had built with her own hands. The way the whole house stayed warm even on the coldest nights because that oven held heat like nothing else. She had called it the heart of the home. "Thermal mass," David said quietly to himself. "It's all about thermal mass." He returned to the meeting room just as Prilix was dismissing everyone. The Voluni coordinator looked exhausted and defeated. "Coordinator," David said, "I need permission to take a ground vehicle to the eastern ridge." Prilix looked at him with tired eyes. "For what purpose?" "We need all resources focused on survival." "I have an idea. Something from my world. From my childhood." "What kind of idea?" David thought about how to explain it. How do you tell a species that evolved on a warm world about the human relationship with fire? How do you explain 10,000 years of burning things to stay alive? "Where I come from," David said, "we have a saying. When the cold comes, you don't fight it with machines. You fight it with stone and fire and patience." Prilix stared at him for a long moment. Behind them, Tezson slumped against a wall, too cold to stand properly. "Take the vehicle," Prilix finally said. "But David, whatever you are planning, please hurry. We do not have much time." David grabbed his thermal suit and headed for the vehicle bay. As he passed the medical wing, he saw Bryn sitting alone, her fur fluffed out against the cold. She looked up at him with curious eyes. "Where are you going?" she asked. "To get some dirt." "Dirt?" David smiled. "Where I come from, dirt saved us more times than any machine ever did. Want to come along?" Bryn stood up, her small body shivering. "Yes, I want to understand what the human is thinking." They drove east through the frozen landscape, toward the ridge where David had once found clay. Behind them, Research Station Horizon grew smaller in the rear window. Its lights flickered as the heating system struggled against the cold. David thought about his grandmother. He thought about the oven she had built. He thought about the bread she had baked and the story she had told by the fire. "My grandmother always said that humans survived because we learned to carry warmth with us," David told Bryn. not just in our bodies, in our tools, in our buildings, in our traditions. I do not understand, Bryn admitted. You will, David said. I promise you will. The eastern ridge appeared ahead of them. David stopped the vehicle and stepped out into the bitter cold. He knelt down and dug his gloved hands into the frozen earth. Beneath the frost, he found what he was looking for. Dense gray clay, perfect for holding heat. This, David said, holding up a handful of the cold earth, is how we are going to survive. The clay was heavier than Bryn expected. She watched David load sample after sample into the ground vehicle, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air. The human worked without stopping, without complaining, his hands moving with a purpose she did not understand. The Kolari had never seen anyone treat dirt like it was precious. Tell me about your grandmother, Bryn said as they drove back toward the station. David was quiet for a moment. His eyes looked far away, seeing something that was not on this frozen world. She lived in the mountains of Montana. That is a cold place on Earth. Winters there could kill you if you were not ready. He shifted the vehicle around a patch of ice. She did not trust machines. She said machines break. She said the old ways never break. What old ways? Fire, stone, clay, patience. David smiled slightly. She built an oven with her own hands when she was younger than I am now. It took her 3 months, but that oven lasted 40 years. Every winter, it kept her family warm. Every morning, it gave them fresh bread. She said it was the heart of her home. Bryn did not fully understand, but she could hear the love in David's voice. And you think you can build such a thing here? I think I have to try. They returned to the station as the temperature dropped another 5 degrees. Inside, the colonists were gathered in small groups, trying to share body heat. The Voluni moved like they were walking through thick liquid. The Draconid engineer Tezsin was nowhere to be seen. David found Prilix in the command center. I need tools, and I need helpers. For what exactly? David spread his clay samples on a table. I'm going to build an oven. A traditional earth oven made of stone and clay. It will hold heat for hours after the fire goes out. We can warm the medical bay first, then build more throughout the station. Prilix examined the clay with skeptical eyes. This is very primitive, David. Yes, it is. My grandmother's design is 10,000 years old. David met the coordinator's gaze. But 10,000 years ago, humans survived ice ages with nothing but fire and stone. We did not have heating systems. We did not have power grids. We had cleverness and we had our hands. Before Prilix could respond, an alarm sounded. Medical emergency. They found Tezsin collapsed in the engineering bay. The Draconid's body was cold to the touch, his breathing shallow. The station's doctor, a Voluni named Paleth, worked frantically to warm him. His species cannot regulate internal temperature, Paleth explained. They are reptilian. They need external heat sources. Without proper warmth, his organs will begin to shut down. David looked at Tessin's still form. The proud engineer who had designed half the station's systems was dying because no one had planned for real winter. How long does he have? David asked. Hours. Maybe a day if we can get him somewhere warmer. David turned to Prilix. Give me the tools. Give me helpers. I will build the first oven in the medical bay. We can save him. Something changed in Prilix's face. The skepticism faded, replaced by desperate hope. Take whatever you need. David worked through the night. His hands bled from shaping clay. His back ached from carrying stones. Bryn stayed with him, learning how to mix clay with water and sand to make it stronger. She learned how to build a foundation that would not crack. She learned how to shape a dome that would hold heat inside. On Earth, David explained as he worked, we call this thermal mass. The clay and stone absorb heat from the fire. Then they release it slowly for hours after the flames die. It is not about burning more fuel. It is about using fuel wisely. By morning, the oven was complete. It was not beautiful. It was rough and uneven, built in a corner of the medical bay with whatever materials David could find. But when he lit the first fire inside it, the effect was immediate. Heat radiated outward. Not the dry, thin heat of the station's failing systems, but a deep warmth that seemed to sink into bones. The medical bay, which had been dangerously cold for days, began to warm. Tezsin stirred. The Draconid opened his eyes slowly, confused. His scales had begun to regain their color. He looked around the room until he found the source of the warmth, the ugly clay structure in the corner with flames dancing inside. What strange magic is this? Tezsin asked, his voice weak but wondering. David sat beside him, exhausted but smiling. Not magic, just something my grandmother taught me. Something humans have known for 10,000 years. Bryn added more fuel to the fire. The oven accepted it eagerly, the clay walls glowing with stored heat. Fire is dangerous, Tezsin said slowly. My people learned to fear it. So did mine once. David watched the flames. But then we learned to control it, to make it work for us instead of against us. Fire killed many of my ancestors, but also saved us. It kept us warm when the ice came. It cooked our food. It brought us together in the darkness. Tezsin was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out one clawed hand and touched the warm clay of the oven. Will you teach me? The Draconid asked. Will you teach me how to build this thing? David nodded. I will teach everyone. That is how my grandmother would have wanted it. She always said that knowledge kept warm is knowledge wasted. You have to share it. You have to spread it around. By noon, word had spread through the station. The medical bay was warm. Tezsin was recovering, and a strange human had built something impossible out of dirt and fire. Colonists began to gather at the medical bay door just to feel the warmth that radiated from within. Prillix came to see for himself, standing in the doorway with wonder on his thin face. How long will the heat last? He asked. The fire has been out for 2 hours, David said. The oven is still warm. It will stay warm for several more. Remarkable. David shook his head. Not remarkable. Just old. Very, very old. Outside, the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. The station's heating system groaned and flickered. But in the medical bay, warmth held steady, radiating from a pile of clay and stone that a human had built with his bleeding hands. David looked out the window at the frozen landscape. This is just the beginning, he said quietly. We're going to need something much bigger. The smell changed everything. David had found dried plant stalks near the eastern ridge. When burned, they produced a clean heat with a pleasant woody scent. But it was not the burning plants that drew colonists to the medical bay. It was the bread. He had mixed flour from the agricultural stores with water and yeast. Simple ingredients. The most basic recipe his grandmother had taught him. He shaped the dough with hands still raw from building and slid it into the oven on a flat stone. Within an hour, the entire station could smell it. Bryn was the first to arrive after the bread came out. Her small nose twitched as she entered the medical bay. What is that? Bread, made the way my grandmother made it. David broke the warm loaf and handed her a piece. Careful, it is hot. Bryn bit into it cautiously. Her eyes went wide. This is wonderful. The heat is inside the food. That is the magic of an oven. Not just warmth for the body, but warmth for the stomach. More colonists came. Voluni, Kalari, even a few Draconids who had heard about Tezsin's recovery. They gathered around the ugly clay oven, drawn by heat and scent, and something harder to name. David broke bread and shared it with everyone who came. That a Voluni named Sorrel stood at the back of the crowd, watching with suspicious eyes. He was an older colonist who had lived on many worlds and had little patience for primitive solutions. When the crowd thinned, he approached David. This is foolish, Sorrel said. One oven will not save us. The winter will last months. You cannot burn enough fuel to keep everyone warm. David did not argue. You're right. One oven is not enough. We need many. We need them in every section of the station. Impossible. We do not have the materials. We do not have the knowledge. The clay is free. I can teach anyone to build. The knowledge spreads as fast as people are willing to learn. David met Schurl. Where I come from, this is how humans survived. Not alone, together, sharing fire and food and the work of building. Sorrel said nothing. He turned and left the medical bay. But the next morning, David saw him carrying stones. The work expanded quickly. David organized teams. The Kolari, with their small, nimble hands, were excellent at mixing clay. The Draconids, though still weakened by the cold, could carry heavy stones once they had warmed up near the ovens. Even the Voluni learned to gather fuel. Though they kept a nervous distance from the flames themselves, Bryn became David's best student. She asked endless questions, memorizing every detail of oven construction. She wanted to understand why each layer of clay was necessary, why the dome had to curve just so, why the opening faced a certain direction. "You are building knowledge," David told her one evening as they worked on the third oven. "Not just an oven. Knowledge that will last longer than the clay." "On my world," Bryn said, "we store knowledge in crystal memory. We do not build things with our hands. Crystal memory can be lost. It can be destroyed. It can be forgotten when the machines that read it fail." David smoothed clay with practiced fingers. "But this knowledge lives in hands and minds. It passes from teacher to student. It changes and grows. My grandmother learned from her mother, who learned from her mother, going back generations beyond counting." The third oven was placed in the engineering section, where the power systems were failing fastest. Tez's son, now recovered enough to work, helped with the design. He added improvements that David had not considered: vents that controlled airflow and stone channels that directed heat more efficiently. "Your species has done this for 10,000 years, Tez's son said. "My species has worked with metal and crystal for 50,000. Perhaps there is something to learn from both." The fourth oven went into the residential quarters. The fifth went into the food storage area, where it also helped keep provisions from freezing. Each oven was different, shaped by whoever helped build it, but they all worked on the same ancient principle: heat stored in mass, warmth released slowly. Fire turned into something useful instead of something feared. On the eighth day, Sorrel brought David a gift. It was a heating element from his personal quarters. A small metal device that used almost no power but generated steady warmth. "I was saving it for myself," the old Voluni admitted. "But I watched you share your bread with everyone who came. You gave away warmth without asking anything in return." David accepted the gift. "Thank you. We can use this to help start fires on cold mornings." "I still think this is primitive," Sorrel said. "But I have lived on many worlds, and I have never seen a colony work together like this. Building things with their hands, sharing fire and food. It is strange, but it is also beautiful." That night, David stood in the main hall and watched the station. 6 ovens now burned throughout the complex. Colonists gathered around them, not just for warmth, but for company. They talked and laughed and shared meals. The fear that had gripped everyone just days ago was fading, replaced by something like hope. But David knew it was not enough. He checked the weather sensors. The temperature had dropped another 15 degrees overnight. The long-range forecast showed something worse coming. A storm system was building in the northern hemisphere. The biggest storm the planet had ever recorded. They had 6 small ovens. The storm would require something much larger. David found Prilix in the command center, staring at the same forecast. "We need to talk," David said. "I know. I have been thinking the same thing." Prilix turned to face him. The main hall. It is the largest interior space in the station. If we're going to survive the storm, we need everyone together. And we need more heat than 6 ovens can provide. David nodded slowly. "My grandmother told me about something called a hypocaust. The Romans built them 2,000 years ago. It is a system that heats an entire room from below, like an oven for a building instead of for bread. Can you build it? Not alone. I will need every hand in this station, and I will need help from someone who understands engineering better than I do." Prilix was quiet for a moment. Then he made an announcement over the station's communication system. "All personnel, please report to the main hall. We have work to do." Tezson studied David's drawings with the focused intensity of an engineer encountering something new. "You want to build a fire chamber beneath the floor," the Draconid said slowly. "The heat rises through stone channels and warms the entire room from below." "Yes." The Romans called it a hypocaust. They heated bathhouses this way for centuries. David traced the design with one finger. "We cannot dig beneath the station floor, but we can build a raised platform. Stone on top, fire channels underneath. Everyone gathers on the platform and stays warm. The structural requirements are significant." Tezson pulled out his engineering tablet and began calculations. "But possible. We would need to reinforce the foundation. And the heat distribution must be even, or some areas will burn while others freeze. That is why I need you. I know how to build ovens. You know how to make things work efficiently. Tessin looked up from his calculations. His eyes held a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. Among my people, building something together creates a bond. A partnership that lasts beyond the project itself. Among mine too, David said. We call it friendship. The main hall became a construction site. Every colonist contributed something. The Kolari hauled clay from the eastern ridge until their small bodies ached. The Voluni organized supply chains and managed resources with their natural gift for coordination. The Draconids carried the heaviest stones, growing stronger each day as the existing ovens kept them warm. Bryn worked alongside David from dawn until late into the night. She had learned to mix clay with the perfect consistency to shape stones so they fit together without gaps. Her small hands were calloused now, marked by the work of building. On my world, she told David one evening, the elders say that knowledge is sacred and must be preserved in perfect form. They would not approve of what I am doing here. What do you mean? I am changing your grandmother's design, adding things, removing things, making it fit our needs. David smiled. My grandmother would have approved. She always said that tradition is not about doing things the same way forever. It is about understanding why things work, so you can change them when you need to. The great hearth took shape over 12 days. It was a massive platform of stone and clay, raised half a meter off the main hall floor. Beneath it ran channels where fire would burn, the heat rising through carefully placed vents. At the center was a fire pit open to the air, where flames could be fed and watched. And on the fifth day, a support beam collapsed. David was beneath the platform, checking the fire channels, when the structure groaned and shifted. Stone and clay came down around him. He heard shouting, felt something strike his shoulder, and then everything went dark that he woke to Tessin's face above him. The Draconid had pulled him free from the rubble, carrying him to safety with strength that should have been impossible for someone still recovering from cold shock. You saved my life, David said weakly. You saved mine first. Tessin helped him sit up. Besides, among my people, we protect those who build with us. You're a clan now, whether you intended it or not. David's shoulder was badly bruised, but not broken. He insisted on returning to work that same day, though Tessin and Bryn forced him to supervise from a chair instead of climbing into the fire channels. The great hearth was completed on the 12th day. It filled nearly half the main hall, a monument to cooperation that every species in the station had helped create. When they lit the first fire beneath it, everyone gathered to watch. The flames caught quickly, spreading through the channels beneath the stone platform. Heat began to rise. The surface of the hearth warmed slowly, evenly, exactly as Tessin's calculations had predicted. Prilix was the first to step onto the platform. His thin Voluni body had suffered terribly in the cold, but now he stood on warm stone and closed his eyes. It is like standing in sunlight, he said quietly. I had forgotten what that felt like. Others followed. Kolari curled up on the warm stones, their fur fluffing out contentedly. Draconids spread themselves across the platform, absorbing heat through their scales. Even Sorrel, who had criticized David's primitive methods, found a spot near the central fire pit and sat in comfortable silence. David remained standing at the edge, watching his work come to life. The fire burned steadily. The stone glowed with stored heat. And around him, aliens from different worlds gathered together in warmth that had not existed 2 weeks ago. Bryn tugged at his sleeve. Why do you not join them? I am enjoying the view. Humans are strange. You build beautiful things and then stand apart from them. David laughed softly. My grandmother was the same way. She said that the best part of building was watching others enjoy what you built. That night, something remarkable happened. Without anyone planning it, the colonists began to share stories. The Kalari spoke of their burrow communities, where families huddled together for warmth during their world's brief cold seasons. The Draconids told tales of volcanic caves where their ancestors had sought heat. Even the Voluni, who came from a world without winter, spoke of their ancestors who had traveled between stars, carrying warmth with them across the void, and David told them about Earth. About ice ages that had nearly ended humanity. About caves where ancient people had painted walls by firelight. About generations of humans who had learned to survive anything the universe threw at them, not through technology alone, but through stubbornness and creativity and an absolute refusal to give up. "You are not like the other humans I have met," Sorrel said. The others talked about machines and progress. They looked down on old ways. "The old ways kept us alive when nothing else could," David replied. "I think maybe they can do it again." The fire crackled. The stone held heat. And for one night, the colony forgot about the storm that was coming to IT arrived 3 days later. The largest blizzard in Ardith 7's recorded history. Winds that could freeze exposed skin in minutes. Snow that buried the station's external sensors. But inside the main hall, gathered around the great hearth, the colonists were warm. The storm screamed for 6 days. Outside the station, wind tore at metal walls. Snow piled higher than the windows. Temperature sensors stopped working on the second day, but everyone knew it was colder than anything the planet had ever recorded. Inside, the colonists lived on the great hearth. David organized shifts to maintain the fires. Teams of 3 worked 4 hours at a time, feeding dried plant stalks into the channels beneath the platform. The work was constant. If the fires died, the stone would cool. If the stone cooled, people would die. "We have enough fuel for maybe 8 more days," Prilix reported on the 3rd morning. The storm shows no sign of ending. David looked at the fuel supplies. Carefully stacked bundles of dried vegetation, gathered over weeks of preparation. He had hoped it would be enough. "We will stretch it," he said. "Smaller fires, more carefully tended. The stone holds heat well. We do not need roaring flames. We need steady warmth." The rationing began. Fires that had burned bright now burned low and careful. David taught everyone how to feed a fire properly, adding fuel in small amounts instead of large piles. Every stick and stalk became precious. Food was rationed too. David showed the colonists how to make soup from almost nothing, stretching limited supplies with water and careful cooking. Hot food mattered more than ever. It was not just nutrition. It was comfort. It was hope that on the 4th day, Bryn fell ill. The young Kalari had worked harder than anyone except David himself. She had built and carried and organized without rest. Now her small body had given out. She lay near the central fire pit, her fur dull, her breathing shallow. David sat beside her through the night. He held her small paw and told her stories about Earth, about forests where his grandmother had walked, about mountains that touched the clouds, about winters that lasted months but always ended in spring. "I am not afraid," Bryn whispered. "I have seen what you built. Even if I do not survive, the knowledge will." "You will survive," David said firmly. "I did not teach you everything just to lose you now." By morning, her fever had broken. The warmth of the hearth had done what medicine could not. Bryn was weak but alive, wrapped in borrowed blankets on the warm stone platform. And on the 5th day, Sorrel became the most dedicated firekeeper. The old Valuni who had once called David's methods primitive now worked tirelessly to maintain the flames. He learned the rhythm of the fire, when it needed more fuel and when it needed more air. He taught others what he learned. "I was wrong about you," Sorrel told David during a quiet moment. "I thought you were bringing us backward. Instead, you showed us something we had forgotten." "What is that?" "That survival is not about having the best technology. It is about using whatever you have." Sorrel added a careful stick to the fire. "My people have been spacefaring for 20,000 years. We forgot what it meant to struggle, to build with our hands, to need each other." That night, Tessin performed a draconic ceremony. He stood before the gathered colonists and spoke in his own language, words that his translator did not convert. Then he reached up to his own chest and carefully removed a single scale. The act clearly caused him pain, but he completed it without flinching. He offered the scale to David. "Among my people, this is the highest honor we can give," Tessin explained. "A piece of ourselves, given freely, to mark a bond that death cannot break. You're my clan brother now, David Reyes. Your enemies are my enemies. Your burdens are my burdens. Your fire is my fire." David accepted the scale with reverence. I do not have scales to give you, but I will give you this. He reached into his pocket and removed a small stone. It was rough and ordinary, just a piece of clay that had not quite made it into the oven weeks ago. Where I come from, we mark friendship with symbols too. This stone was part of the first oven, the one that saved your life. Keep it, and remember that we built something together. Tez's son closed his clawed hand around the stone. I will keep it always. On the fifth night, the temperature inside dropped dangerously. The storm had grown worse. The station's walls groaned under the wind. Cold seeped through cracks and seams that had never been tested against such weather. Even the great hearth struggled to keep up. David gathered what fuel remained and realized they were short. The careful rationing had helped, but not enough. The fires were dying. We need more fuel, Prilix said. Anything that will burn. Colonists began bringing personal items. Wooden decorations from quarters. Paper documents that had been kept for sentiment. Cloth that could be spared. Everything that would burn was brought to the firekeepers. David looked at his own belongings. His data tablet with pictures of Earth. The journal he had kept since arriving on Ardith 7. The wool blanket his grandmother had made for him before he left home. He threw them all into the fire. Bryn, still weak but sitting up now, watched him with wide eyes. That blanket meant something to you. Yes, it did. David watched the wool catch flame, his grandmother's work turning to warmth. But keeping people alive means more. She would understand. She always said that things are just things. People are what matter. The fire burned brighter. The stone warmed again, and the colony survived another night. Dawn came on the sixth day. David had not slept in over 100 hours. He had worked and organized and encouraged and given everything he had to give. Now his body simply stopped. He collapsed beside the great hearth, falling onto warm stone that he had helped build with his bleeding hands. The last thing he heard before darkness took him was Bryn's voice, calling for help. David opened his eyes to warmth that he was in the medical bay, surrounded by faces he had come to know over the past weeks. Voluni, Kolari, Draconid, all watching him with expressions that crossed the boundaries of species. Prilix stood at the foot of his bed. Bryn sat beside him, holding his hand with both of her small paws. Tezson loomed behind her, the scale gap on his chest still visible. How long? David asked, his voice rough. 3 days, Prilix answered. The storm ended the morning after you collapsed. You did not wake when we moved you here. The colony, everyone survived. Prilix's voice carried weight that his translator could not fully convey. Every single person. Because of you. David tried to sit up. His body protested, muscles aching from weeks of constant work. But he managed it with Tesson's help. Through the medical bay window, he could see sunlight. Actual sunlight, breaking through clouds for the first time in weeks. The snow outside was already beginning to melt. The supply ships, David said. When do they arrive? They came 2 weeks after the storm ended. The rescue crews found us healthy and warm. Prilix allowed himself a small smile. They were quite confused. Their model showed that we should all be dead. The next few days passed in a blur of recovery and celebration. David was too weak to work, but he could watch as the station returned to normal operations. The smaller ovens were kept burning, providing comfortable warmth throughout the complex. The great hearth remained the center of colony life, a gathering place that people were reluctant to abandon even as the weather improved. When David was strong enough to walk, Prilix called a formal assembly. The entire colony gathered in the main hall around the hearth that had saved them. Representatives from the Galactic Union's rescue fleet stood at the edges, watching with curious eyes. They had come expecting to find survivors barely clinging to life. Instead, they found a thriving community. Prilix stepped onto the great hearth platform. The Galactic Union has asked me to submit a report on how we survived. I have also been asked to recommend individuals for recognition. He paused, looking at David. There is only one recommendation I can make. He held up a small medal, the Galactic Union's highest civilian honor. David Reyes, for exceptional service in the preservation of life, I am authorized to present you with this award. David stood slowly. Everyone watched as he walked to the platform. his legs still unsteady. He looked at the medal in Prillix's hand. "I cannot accept that," David said. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Even the union representatives looked surprised. "Why not?" Prillix asked. "Because I did not save this colony alone. Everyone here built something together. The Kolari gathered clay. The Draconids carried stone. The Voluni organized supplies. Bryn learned everything I taught and improved on it. Tessin made my designs actually work." David looked around at the faces watching him. "If you want to honor what happened here, do not give me a medal. Share the knowledge instead. Send my grandmother's designs to every colony in the galaxy. Teach everyone how to build ovens and hearths and survive without machines." Prillix was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "That can be arranged." Over the following months, David's wish came true. The great hearth of Research Station Horizon became famous throughout the Galactic Union. Colony administrators requested copies of the designs. Engineers studied the combination of human tradition and alien innovation that Tessin had helped create. Survival manuals were updated to include instructions for building simple ovens from local materials. Bryn wrote a book. She documented everything she had learned, from mixing clay to reading a fire to the philosophy of sharing warmth. She called it Lessons from Earth and dedicated it to David's grandmother, a woman she had never met but felt she knew through her grandson's stories. Tessin returned to his homeworld briefly, then came back to Ardith 7. He said he could not leave his clan brother. He began teaching Draconid engineers the principles of thermal mass, blending ancient human knowledge with advanced alien metallurgy. Sorrel, the old skeptic, became the station's official firekeeper. He maintained the great hearth with religious devotion, treating it as something sacred that had given him new purpose in his final years. David stayed on Ardith 7. He had offers to travel, to teach, to consult for wealthy colonies and prestigious universities. He turned them all down. "My grandmother never left her mountains," he told Prillix when asked. "She said that home is where you build your hearth. This is my home now." Years passed. The station grew. New colonists arrived and learned the old ways alongside the new. Every winter, the great hearth burned at the center of community life, surrounded by people sharing food and stories and warmth. One day, a young Voluni child visited the station with her parent. The child had never seen real fire before. They stood at the edge of the great hearth, watching the flames with wonder. "Why is there always a fire burning here?" the child asked. The parent, who had read Bryn's book and followed the news from Ardith 7 for years, knelt beside their child. "Long ago, during a terrible winter, a human taught this colony something important. He taught them that warmth is not just temperature. It is not something machines create. Warmth is something you build together, with your hands and your knowledge and your willingness to share." The child watched the fire dance. Around the hearth, colonists of different species sat together, eating and talking as they had done for years. The human's name was David, the parent continued. He learned to build fires from his grandmother, who learned from her mother, going back further than anyone can count. And now that knowledge belongs to everyone. The child thought about this for a moment. Then they asked, "Will the fire ever go out?" Across the hearth, David Reyes looked up from his conversation with Bryn and Tessin. His hair was gray now, his hands worn from years of building. But his eyes still held the same warmth they had always carried. He did not know the child or their parent. He did not need to. He simply smiled and returned to his friends, to the fire he had built, to the warmth he had shared with a galaxy that had almost forgotten what warmth meant. The parent answered their child's question. "No, as long as someone remembers how to build it, the fire will never go out."